Hello, everybody. Yeah, here we are. My name's Ian,
And hello, my name's Heather.
and we're just doing a couple of little videos to kind of introduce ourselves and find out a little bit more about each other. Yeah, I've got one of our team, Heather Monro, here. Yeah, Heather is quite humble about her background. I think it's up to me to say that yeah, Heather was a world championship medalist athlete, and I'd like to ask a little bit more about that journey with you, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. It's not something I talk about very often nowadays. Um, and I think the reason that I often don't talk about it is partly because I have a discomfort with labels. With as soon as we say we are a or we were a, then that creates some sort of story, doesn't it? Of some sort of reified identity or something. And yeah, and perceptions. People all have their different perceptions. But yes, I did spend 20 years of my earlier life in this manifestation, competing for Great Britain on the world stage in a wilderness sport called orienteering. And orienteering is all about um, navigating the unknown, the wilderness, with a map on your own, and yeah, finding your way around um, a course as quickly as possible. So there's masses of metaphor in that for life about kind of forging our own pathway through the unknown. Um, yeah, so many years of honing a craft of being in tune with the wilderness and nature, um, but also competing for medals and competing on the world stage. So yeah, a real interesting mix of both something really quite deeply uh, connected to interbeing and deeply spiritual, but also with a tone of yeah competition and bettering oneself. Yeah.
Mm, very interesting. So, how do you feel about competition now?
Yeah, so I look back on those days as I sort of say with both fondness and some sense of recoil from the word competition. Um, I think the word competition for me often has a connotation of positioning ourselves in relation to somebody else. And so that very quickly puts us into positions of inferiority, superiority, comparing ourselves to others. And of course, that's coming from a notion of a separate self. Um, and Yeah, that element of it and international sport is all about being the best and achieving and measures of success and pursuit of medals and being in the limelight and yeah, positioning yourself in relation to others, and that can be really quite cutthroat, quite damaging, um, driven by the ego, of course, and behind that, driven by fear, driven by a need to prove that in some way, through your achievement, through being more brilliant than anybody else, you're you, you're worth something, and that element of chasing medals and competing, I I've left behind, or I like to think I've left most of that behind. Um, um, yeah, it didn't make me happy, because there was a sort of constant sense of okay, so I've won that medal. What next? What else am I going to do to make myself feel okay, to feel good about myself? And most of that, of course, is driven by yeah, insecurities, and yeah, we can go into kind of childhood experience and collective trauma and why we behave in that way. But then there's also a beautiful element of that competition that nurtured a sense of honing a craft, trying to be a master of what you did, and a real love of the art of your craft. And that's more, is it a competition with yourself? I don't really like the word competition much at all, but it's a sort of expanding yourself. It's a playing with what can I do with my capacity if I continue to expand it. What boundaries can I push in terms of knowing myself, knowing my capabilities, and knowing my craft, and that is a beautiful thing, actually, and I very much cherish that time from my competitive career.
Mm,
So yeah, mixed feelings about competition.
mm. Yeah, what's coming up for me as you're speaking is this kind of is this, hearing your journey and knowing you as well is kind of like almost like from this kind of separation to this coming together and
Mm.
interconnectedness. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Mm. Yeah. So often, performers in all sorts of different fields talk about the experience of flow or being in the zone. So it's very common in sport to talk about being in the zone, but artists, actors, actresses, musicians, writers will talk about flow. Um, this state of expanded consciousness, which for me is very close to this understanding of interbeing, where that sense of self falls away, that sense of separation from, in my case, the terrain I was navigating, and the map itself, that I become the terrain and the terrain becomes me and the map becomes the terrain, and there's a oneness, there's an expansion in that incredible experience of immersion in in the activity. And that's what I mean when I say it was a deeply spiritual experience for me, of oneness, of interbeing, that I've taken kind of beyond my competitive career and has really led me into where I am now and the spiritual path that I'm on and the work that I do. So yeah, very grateful really for that time I spent, and a deep, deep connection to nature as a result of this, the years I spent in the wilderness.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. So how did the kind of transition occur from you being a world class athlete coming into what you spend a lot of your time doing, accompanying leaders in their journey of becoming?
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful words. Um, yeah, so I was very fortunate because I was competing at a very high level in my sport to come into contact with some absolutely incredible practitioners themselves, sports psychologists who yeah, introduced me, I guess, to practice, to
Mm,
to looking deeply into who am I and what am I becoming, and yeah, understanding the concept of the self, and reflective practice. In fact, my first contacts with meditative practice were through sports psychology. And so as I retired from competition in my 30s, um, I had this fascination that had been sown, this seed of fascination around all of that, around the psychology behind performance, around understanding more of our human nature and our consciousness. And that was my route into, well, initially working with actually Olympic athletes as they retired and started to question kind of what am I going to do with the rest of my life. And then that took me into the wider field of coaching, of accompanying people on their journeys of, as you said, becoming and development. And it's just been an expanding field since then, really, of walking alongside others, looking deeply and considering really big questions. And then there was a point. I've been working with leaders. I've been coaching for at least 15 years now. And the coaching industry, I think focuses a lot on organizational performance, on personal development and growth and well-being, workplace relationships, work-life balance. Those are all things that great things, wonderful things, and getting wonderful feedback from clients about all of those things. But having this sense that actually I was helping them just to kind of survive in systems that were ultimately not functioning well, in our systemic ill-being, the state of the world, the climate crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis, the wars raging around the world, and started to question, was I actually just colluding with a bigger system by helping people survive in those systems? And wouldn't it be more worthwhile to do work that was helping people to transform the systems? And so from that beginning of kind of an interest in the psychology of performance, I've gradually, I suppose, grown into a space where I'm really working with people on expanding their consciousness and helping them to expand the field of consciousness in their workplaces, which again feels like a deeply spiritual activity. So nowadays I don't actually really like the word coach. I tend to think of myself more as a kind of spiritual friend or developmental companion for leaders and anybody, in fact. What do we mean by leadership? So yeah, aspirational human beings.
What do we mean? What do you mean? What do we mean? What do you mean by spiritual friend?
Oh, now there's a question. Well, I suppose what all I can say is what I do is I sit in a field of potential, an expansive field of being with whoever I'm with, and we feel into that space together, and we grow into that space together, and so there is no separation again between me and the client, if you want to call them a client, or the friend. We're in that space together, and we're feeling into, we're attuning into the field and inquiring into what more might be possible if we expanded into even more of our consciousness, our field of potential. So a friend, or what do I mean by a friend? A second body, to use the Buddhist terminology. Yeah, great question.
And we've got about a minute left. Is there anything else you'd like to conclude with, Heather?
Yeah, I think what's coming up for me now is often when people ask me about my sporting background, they seem to be coming from various places. There's one sort of element of, oh, that's exciting, and maybe it's a bit glamorous, because you watch athletes on television getting their medals and the Union Jacks flying in the wind and the national anthem playing and stuff. And so there's that element of
I can admit I had a lot of jealousy coming up when I came into contact with you. Like, oh my goodness, what I'd have done to be a professional footballer.
yeah. So there's that bit, and of course, it's nothing. Nothing is, when you know it well, is the glamorous kind of shop front. There's that, and there's also, I think, people who perhaps are on the path who look at it and say, oh, that sounds like it must have been really damaging, that to be in these performance environments that are so ruthless. I think actually there's something beautiful in everything. So I'm very grateful for those experiences, to have grown in them. Yeah.
No mud, no lotus.
Precisely.